Fantastic. We are live. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, afternoon, all that lovely stuff we like to say when it comes to streaming and doing events for people. So thank you so much for being here, everyone who's watching live. Or if you're on Team Replay and you're catching this later, thanks for watching this in the past or after we've all done this. Great. You'll see the live chat. And if you're watching this afterwards, no problem. You can always catch up with us later, check in on questions and answers. Happy to get back to you. But I just want to say thank you all so much for being here for this virtual developer meetup. I know we all really prefer to do these things live and in person, but it doesn't always work. We're all across the globe. So while we are working on getting more of those scheduled in everyone's local region, and I'll come back to that in a second, I'm going to be hosting a series of these, hopefully at least once per month like this, bringing people in, having conversations, demos, all that type of stuff, so we can stay connected as often as possible. If, however, you want to host a meetup in your local area, wherever that local area happens to be, if you join the Conductor Slack, which I will make sure to put into the chat here in a minute, if you join the Conductor Slack, we have a channel in there for you specifically for meetups, and you are more than welcome to drop a note in there. Tag me. I'm Jeff Bull. Run developer community things and stuff at Orkes. Just drop a note in there, tag me, and I will happily reach out to you, and we can arrange to support you in any way possible for your local meetup. All right. This is cool. Everyone on YouTube or on LinkedIn that's watching, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Just a quick intro. Again, my name is Jeff Bull. I'm the developer community manager for Orkes. We run the enterprise version of Conductor, and we also oversee the Conductor open source project. And today's meetup is all about just Conductor as a concept, how you scale applications, how you build out workflows, and all those things. We got some amazing guests. Viren, who's going to be here as our CTO of Orkes, is going to be doing a kind of a conversation and demo here in just a few minutes. Then we have Dan Miller and Dale Brady, both from the Conductor open source community, who actively use it themselves and in their business, which will be really good conversations as well. So if you have any questions, comments, curiosities, feedback, anything along the way, just drop it in the live chat on either YouTube or LinkedIn. I will be watching that, trying to engage with you as much as I can, bringing questions in periodically, and then we'll have a nice little section at the end for Q&A live. All right, I think we can get started. I don't need to just wax poetic for the next 30 minutes just to take up space. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in Viren, our first guest. Viren, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing good. Nice morning today.
Yeah.
So yeah, great.
I know here in the Sacramento area, it rained a little bit last night, but it was actually clear this morning. So you walk out, and it's always nice after a rain when like all the clouds kind of disappear and there's like a nice chill to the air. It's almost like after a first snow. It's pretty cool. And you're in the Bay Area, right?
I am in the Bay Area. That's right. Yes.
Right on.
Yep.
Before we dive into your section, would you mind giving everybody a little bit of an intro to yourself, your background, and how we got to this place?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Yes. So hi everyone. Nice meeting you. My name is Viren. Um, I am one of the co-founders at Orkes and primarily responsible for building and managing Conductor open source. Um, Happy to be here as part of this series. Would love your feedback on the open source, any new features that you would like to see. We have an exciting roadmap as well in terms of what is it that we are building with Conductor. Would love to hear your thoughts there, and if you have use cases, success stories that you would like to share. Yeah,
Right
we are out
on.
here.
Excellent. Thanks, Viren. So this first section, I'm going to give you the screen share here in just a moment if you'd like, and you can demo and show off whatever you'd like. But this first section we thought would be really interesting to kind of give you a chance to demo Conductor, what it is, what it does, give everyone a little overview. It's a 20-minute session, so, it won't be a deep dive, but try to give everyone a better sense of what exactly is this platform, what can it do for you, and like how can it make you successful when you're actually trying to scale scale your app.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
So
right.
how about I start sharing my screen and we can kind of
Perfect.
just right into it.
I will bring up your screen share.
Okay.
Let me know when you have that ready. There it is. I see it.
All right.
Give me 1 second to bring that in for everybody. Apologize, everyone. I didn't have that one quite prepped. Let me bring this into. Come on. Well, if you want to get started talking, go ahead, Viren. I'm going to try to bring in the your screen share right now.
Sounds good. Excuse me. All right. So, what is Conductor, right? So, Conductor is a platform essentially for building event-driven systems, microservices, service workers, language models, AI orchestration. It's a platform for orchestration. And before we get into Conductor, one thing that I would like to kind of point out, right, is how you know the development stack has kind of evolved over the years. Um, if you think about it, right, like we went from mainframes. I think they are still there, somewhere lurking in the industry, all the way till like advantages of containerizing your applications, Kubernetes, event driven systems. And when you start to think about the cloud native applications, when you think about containerization, more and more you think about it, right, like we are all building distributed applications, because no longer is the case where every part of your app is running on the same machine or in the same process, but rather you have a distributed environment where you have microservices, service workers. Even if you have monolithic applications, so to speak, oftentimes they are deployed across different components, and these components are interacting with each other. Um, and in the end, why do we want to use event driven architecture, and what is it that it solves, right? Essentially, it allows you to kind of respond to various events rather than having to kind of try to hard code all of those things. That can also be very flexible, right? Like typically you have a message broker infrastructure that acts as a reactive system, so that like you could have a different cadence at which the publishers and consumers are working. And in the end, like it allows you to kind of reduce a very tight coupling between the services, so that like services can evolve each other independently. They can you can integrate across different heterogeneous systems. You don't have to have everything written in Java or .NET or Go or anything. They could all kind of interplay with each other. And in the end, oftentimes we have long running asynchronous flows. Think about payment processing, think about order management in e-commerce. A lot of systems around us are asynchronous in the nature, right? They take minutes, hours, days, sometimes years to complete. And event driven applications lends itself very well in terms of the architectural side to be able to kind of achieve those things. And a very high level, right, if you think about event driven microservices, and microservices here I'm referring to as a piece of a software or a component that is well defined, follows single responsibility principle, ideally is idempotent, has a localized database. So think about it as, let's say in a banking system, I have a service that is responsible for checking the or getting the user information, right, or getting the bank balance, or initiating an ACH transfer. So it does exactly one thing. It does it very well, responds to an event which contains the right set of payload and information. And if there is a problem with that, it errors out and produces the right level of error message and things like that. And now you can see, right, like you can start to compose applications by putting together these services. Um, and if you put an event broker in between, now you get the flexibility of being able to independently scale them, restructure the order in which they are getting executed, and everything that we talked about, right? um, but at the same time, there are also challenges that it now introduces, because everything is essentially kind of driven by an event broker. um, there are a few things that we need to start thinking about, right? One is, how about the order in which everything is kind of executed? So let's think about a very simple application where once you do a checkout process, right, you are asking user creation. Let's say you didn't have an account with the site. You create a user, you place an order, you process the payment. Like who dictates this order? Like where is that information stored? Typically what would happen is that you will publish an event called user is created. It puts it into a database, checks for duplicity and whatever not, publishes a message that I'm done. Once it is done, the order management service picks up the message, does its own thing, publishes a message and pick payment. Processing message, like payment processing system continues from that point onwards, right? As we can see, the order is very implicit. Sometimes it's written in the code, and it's kind of distributed all over the place. We used to have a term for this called distributed monolith. So as you can see, right, like it starts to get more complex, especially when you have a lot more services at play. If you have three, probably it's fine, but what if you have 30? What if you have 300? Things get like really messy at that point of time. One other thing is that, like, every service will maintain its own localized database for local transactions, but the overall process itself, right, like let's say think about uh, sending payment instructions or processing an order. There has to be an overall transaction that needs to be maintained. So if something fails in between, you can execute compensating flows. You are able to kind of restart the transaction if required, maintain some sort of item potency at the transaction level, and so forth. So as you can see, right, it starts to get more and more complex. And this is why we had built Conductor. So going back to the point, right, like one of the things that has kind of come into the forefront very lately is the whole notion of an orchestration system, right? That event driven architecture is great. Event driven choreography has its own set of challenges, and the way to solve that is through orchestration. And orchestration is everywhere, right? It's not something new. Orchestration has been there for a long time. If we look around ourselves, in the tech stack that we use today, um, if we are doing process automation, that's orchestration. If you are into security space, security orchestration also is orchestration. If you are dealing with the data, we have data orchestration systems, right? Event orchestration, Kubernetes is also orchestration. Service orchestration is what is the topic of our discussion today, right? Is another orchestration. So long story short, orchestration is everywhere, and it solves a very fundamental problem when it comes to distributed systems. Is it acts as a centralized coordinator in terms of understanding the world, state of the world, maintains the state, and provides you with all the necessary kind of visibility into how your systems are behaving. You are able to change them with the right level of orchestrator. You can also version control, and safely roll out the changes and everything, right? A typical orchestrator essentially allows you to wire up different tasks or services together, and they don't have to be necessarily linear flows, right? They could have complex decisions, even nested ones, loops, parallel execution. And guess what, like once you have an orchestrator at play, it opens up very interesting opportunities. One is orchestrator knows the state of the world. So if a service fails, you could have configuration at the orchestrator level to do automated retries. If you have a service that is not scaled out to handle a very large amount of workload, you can put rate limits at the orchestrator level rather than having to build service very reactive and try to kind of manage the expectations there. um, and since orchestrator knows everything about what's going on, it can publish very rich set of metrics. So typically when you think about metrics, right, we are publishing metrics at the individual services level. With orchestrator, it can publish metric at an aggregate level, right, like in terms of how the business flows are working, what's the end-to-end latency across every service without having to recompute everything. It can put automated kind of tracing IDs when it is calling the services. So you get distributed tracing with systems if you are using things like, for example, Jaeger or any other distributed tracing systems. So it provides a lot of rich set of features on top of building your applications. And in the end, what it boils down to is that as developers, we don't have to necessarily worry about all of those things into our code. We can just focus on building out those service workers, implementing the business logic, and everything else is taken care by the orchestrator. So I want to introduce Conductor here. Those who are new to Conductor, Conductor is an open source platform. Um, it's fully open source, Apache 2.0 licensed. We built it at Netflix to solve these problems. Since then, we have open sourced it. Late last year, we moved it to a different project. So it is kind of managed by the community. So it is built and managed mostly by the community. And the way Conductor operates is that there are no single point of failure. Oftentimes what happens when you introduce a scheduler, now scheduler becomes your single point of failure. If scheduler is down, then everything is down. So this is where Conductor kind of acts as a fully distributed orchestrator. You can bring down entire Conductor cluster, bring it online, and things will continue to operate. And Conductor also is a fully polyglot system. it does not force you to work with a very specific framework or a language. um, so the way Conductor works is, you are able to write your service workers in any language. um, the SDKs as part of Conductor, they are also open source. They are available in pretty much every language, but they are very lightweight. So to give you an example, if you are using Spring Boot and Java, you can write your services in Spring Boot. You can annotate them as a Conductor worker, and that's it. Nothing else has to be done. Similar concept with Python Go, which means that, like, you don't have to necessarily invest very heavily into Conductor ecosystem beyond very lightweight SDKs. And that means, like, it's easy to kind of get onboarded to Conductor, easy to get offboarded to Conductor if you decide that's not the right thing for you. A very low investment that you need to make. And Conductor takes care of all the aspects of, service communication, rate limits, retries, and whole bunch of things. I'll skip this slide for now. But let's enough talk. How about we kind of go through the Conductor and see how it works, right? um, so here is my Conductor UI. And the way Conductor works is, as a developer, you are writing your services. You can write your services in pretty much any language. And you can write services in two ways. Either you can write a service worker. So if you are familiar with, let's say, writing workers in Kafka, or salary workers on Python, same concept. You write your function, annotate that as a Conductor worker, and you are good to go. The other option is, if you are into microservices, Conductor can invoke those microservices for you, and orchestrate across those things. So since we don't have a lot of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about API orchestration. So oftentimes what happens is, we have a bunch of APIs that we need to orchestrate across different services. And the way to do with Conductor is that, Conductor allows you to kind of separate out your application state from your business logic. So application state is managed as a workflow. So let's say did a simple workflow called demo. So this is where my application state is maintained. And what I'm going to do is, I could have an API endpoint that I want to invoke. Maybe I want to invoke it based on some condition. So let's put a switch case here. I'm going to skip any condition here, so it just goes through straight up onto this one of those flows. So oftentimes it's like, you make a call, let's say get user info, based on user preference you can do X or Y, and finally you do something else, right? A very simple flow. I'm going to save this, and as you can see, right, as I'm kind of building this flow in the UI, it also creates the JSON based code. So you can write this code in any language as well, so you don't have to necessarily do it from the UI. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run this, right? To run a workflow, you can send an API call, you can publish an event, you can schedule it to run on a periodic basis. So if your workflow does, let's say, end of day processing and things like that, you can put a cron job and it will run it for you. And once we complete it, there you go, the whole workflow is completed. As we can see, right, it took about 138 milliseconds to complete the whole thing. So if you want to kind of build API orchestration, it automatically builds notions of circuit breakers, it does retries. So you don't have to worry about all of those things. So everything that we have learned operating APIs at large scale at Netflix has been incorporated into this one. Similarly, your workflow could be long running workflow. Let's say if I want to put a wait task here, right, like I want to wait for some time, I can put a wait here and specify, hey, wait for 1 day before you complete this, and it will wait. So now you don't have to worry about managing a state or having a thread that is running for a or block for a day or things like that. You can put very powerful wait signals inside Conductor, or you could be waiting for a signal, right? You can make a webhook into Conductor to complete this and continue forward. So you can make very complex, pretty powerful workflows pretty quickly, orchestrate them, and build your applications. Um, Again, as I mentioned, Conductor is fully open source, so do take a look at the GitHub repository. If you like it, definitely give it a star. It definitely helps. We have a free developer account, so you can go to developer.orchescloud.com, set up an account, and play by yourself. It's completely free to use. And if you want to kind of try building it out yourself, you can check out the GitHub repository and take a look at the code.
That's awesome, Viren. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I made sure to have that up on the screen there, but I'm going to flash up right now while we're chatting the repo link right here at the bottom. So if anyone's watching, and I know we have a crew over at QCon in San Francisco right now. So for everyone watching at QCon, if you can hear me or you can see this, you can just browse right here, or I can bring back up Viren's QR code and you can scan that. But this is how you can get access right here at the bottom of the screen to the open source. Couple of questions though I have for you, Viren, since we're looking at this. It's really interesting that it was originally built out to scale for a place such as Netflix, as an example.
Yeah.
What I'm really curious about is what are some of the types of like problems that we are seeing customers or people that we're companies that we're talking with, what are they trying, what are some creative or interesting things they're trying to solve that Conductor actually helps with that you might not notice when you're looking at the interface or doing a demo in there? Because I just to kind of say this out loud a little bit, this is one of those things where you look at it and go, wow, this is really cool. I can easily build stuff. But then you
Yeah.
almost get to a place that if you don't necessarily know what problem you're trying to solve, you might go, great, so what do I do next? So I'm really curious, like, what is maybe an example or two of an interesting challenge or problem that Conductor was actually able to help really simplify or solve for a
Yeah.
customer?
So I think that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So, and I would kind of classify that into two categories, right? Like if you think about purely kind of horizontal different type of use cases, so architectural patterns. Um, Conductor is an event-driven system. We have integrations, and Conductor provides integrations with pretty much every messaging services, right? NATS, Kafka, RabbitMQ. And oftentimes, what happens is that no, you have to orchestrate across different types of messaging systems. You are reading a message from Kafka, doing some processing, publishing it to RabbitMQ, and somebody else is listening on things like that. So event-driven orchestration is one thing that Conductor excels very well. There aren't any other systems that I know of that can do that at a scale that Conductor can do. So that's one use case that we have seen. Second use case we just talked about is the API orchestration. API orchestration is interesting one because typically they tend to be very low latency. Um, so we are talking about tens of thousands of requests per second on Conductor cluster, and on like a very relatively tiny cluster. So that's another use case that is otherwise very hard to achieve without writing a lot of code or using frameworks and maintaining the state. Third use case essentially is around in today's world, right? Modern agentic workflows using language models. Um, AI requires you to have an orchestration platform, and Conductor is one of the best platforms today for orchestration. So we have seen customers and users trying to use Conductor for building agentic workflows. There are a few aspects of agentic workflows. I'm going to talk more about it on tomorrow's QCon. So if you are there, definitely drop by. But is that like agentic workflows are often plan and execute kind of a workflows at the core with feedback loops with sometimes humans in the loop, and this is where Conductor has all the right primitives for you to be able to build very complex agentic workflows. That's the third use case that we have seen people using Conductor for. And finally, process orchestration, right? Like let's say, as I mentioned, right, like we are talking about, let's say, order processing system, right? Any service. You are ordering a new car on Rivian or Tesla. That entire process could take days or months to complete. So where are you going to maintain a state there? So that's another use case that we have seen. So that's kind of horizontal side of it, right? Vertically, um, payment processing, user onboarding, order processing, again e-commerce. In
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, it's pretty process heavy. So pretty much every industry that you can think of, some of the applications and systems that we use today day to day runs on Conductor. So that's a testament to how scalable the system is.
That's fantastic. And I know from a developer perspective, there's a lot of flexibility, and we want to get further into that. And you mentioned AI and the agentic workflows and how it supports the
Yeah.
backend on that. But to your point, we'll put a pin in that because, like you said, if you're at QCon tomorrow, you can definitely catch a session. And then also on Thursday, the 21st, this week at 11 a.m. Pacific, we're doing another live stream right here on YouTube on the Orkes channel where we're digging in further with Dilip and Ram to talk more about building out agentic workflows on Conductor and what that looks like and the values of that. Have a really good kind of like Q&A around those. So definitely check out more of the content this week. We'll really dive further into that. Viren, one last thing. Before you go, could you tell everyone just kind of a quick reminder if they are at QCon this week, when your session is and where it's taking place?
So it's tomorrow afternoon, and you can look at the schedule on QCon in terms of the location, which room, and things like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you being here. Have a good rest of your day. And we're going to move on to our next guest, who is, I'll switch over here to Dan Miller. Dan, how are you, sir?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you
Fan-
very much for having me.
Dude, thank you for coming all the way over from the UK. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's raining over here. It's pretty raining.
I'm sure that's what it's like in the Pacific Northwest, and a little bit, like I said earlier in the show, here in the Sacramento, California area. Well, this is cool, Dan. I'm super excited to talk to you. You and I got a chance to meet a few weeks ago after holiday, or just before holiday, and kind of talk a little bit about what you're doing at FDB and with Multilex, and kind of how that plays out. And what I wanted to really get into with you today, and then I'll hand it over to you to do some intros and we can get started, is, I asked the question of Viren when he was here a moment ago about the types of creative problems or creative solutions that can be made or created on top of Conductor, or that Conductor simply empowers you to be able to do. And I've made this joke with people before. It's a very silly joke, and I apologize. It's a very dad joke. I don't think I have a blank piece of paper here. My son and I, my son's 9, on Thursday. And whenever he wants to draw or do some art, which he loves doing, and I love doing with him, I love sitting there doing stuff with him. He's like, okay, Dad, here's a blank piece of paper and here's a pen. Let's just draw something. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to draw? And by the time I'm like, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. I look over, he's already drawn something silly. And he looks and says, Dad, why don't you just draw something? I'm like, I don't, it's a blank piece of paper. I don't know where to begin. And so for a lot of people, I think when you see a tool like Conductor or a platform like Conductor, you have these problems or this problem set that you're trying to address at your company, whether it's scaling out something, building a new thing. You've talked in the past, and not that we need to hone into this too much, but you've talked in the past in other sessions about going from some sort of monolithic style application that was built because it had to be built that way into something that might be more scalable, like a microservices architecture on top of Conductor or whatever. But I can tell, or I can glean that sometimes that can look like just a blank sheet of paper. You dive in and you're like, cool, I have this platform. Now what? Now, what do I do first? Like, what's the first step that I take? And so I thought it might be kind of interesting to get into today with you is how you have thought about solving those types of challenges, and then where Conductor comes in, but mostly how you solve them. And like, we can get into sort of how Conductor kind of empowers it towards the end. But before we do that, we'll bury the lead for everybody. Would you mind introducing yourself, what you do, why you do it, stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Dan Miller. So I'm a tech lead at First Data Bank UK. We are a company that provides clinical decision support, so drug data and various other sort of medical and healthcare drug-centric solutions to providers across the UK. We do have a sister company based in the US who provide similar solutions over in the States and internationally. But essentially, we provide systems that kind of when you go to see your doctor, the tools that we provide look at your medical record, look at the drugs you're going to be given, look at kind of things that are going on, and screen for problems, issues, things that might harm you, kind of harm the patient and stuff. So as you can imagine, like it's a sensitive space. It's about patient care. It's about preventing harm. Last thing we want to do is harm someone. So it's a very interesting sphere. I think also to add, we've been doing this for the last 40 years. I think it is now, maybe 41 years. So when it in terms of like legacy or heritage or whatever you want to call it, we've got everything. We've been doing this stuff for a long time, and with what we're doing, that kind of referential integrity, because this is all about sort of medicines, it's all about patient records, it's all about that making sure what the patient's had in the past is not affecting them in the future. It's kind of really important that data kind of is consistent over time. So patients that have been treated 30 years ago, it still works today. Those IDs, those code systems, and other bits and pieces still hang together, and it's still all good.
Okay, I have like a billion questions that were rolling through my head. Some of it from the last time we talked, and some from what you just said. But I kind of got distracted because a really good question just came in from TechBoz. I'm going to throw it up here on the screen so everyone can see it. This says, "What are they?" Sorry, they ask, "What are we talking about?" Which seemed when I first saw it, I chuckled a little bit to myself. But I'm like, that's actually a really fantastic question. You jump into a webinar live stream, 30 minutes into it, and you're like, this sounds cool, but what the heck are we talking about? So this is probably a good tangent into what specifically we are here to discuss, which is the Conductor as a platform. Now, whether it's you're using, in your case, the open source version of Conductor, or the company you're with has moved to the either hosted or non-hosted enterprise version that Orkes sells. Both are based off of Conductor and the open source project. Hopefully that helps you, TechBoz, and you just keep an eye out here. We're going to keep talking more details about the use cases and things like that. So when Dan and I talked a couple of weeks ago, the way that you described, you said something very similar about what the Multilex product is and what your FDB is trying to do with these prescriptions and how it's been managed over time. And the thing that kept coming to mind, and it's just kind of a silly analogy, but it was like a bowl of spaghetti, because that you have to then connect to all these different things, because to your point, and you could probably do a much better job explaining it than me, whenever you go to get a new medication or you're being prescribed something, somebody, your general practitioner or the pharmacist or people in that chain have to figure out, are these prescription combinations safe to work with each other to treat this patient the way they need to be treated? And very quickly, I think anyone can imagine how complex that might become if it goes beyond even just a couple of medications someone has to take. And like you said, the company's been doing it for 40 years. How has that been solved to this point? Because it kind of is. As soon as I'm like, if we're not doing this in a microservices or a highly scalable environment where there's lots of subcomponents that can be like almost Dungeons and Dragons like, where there's all these different choose your own adventure pieces. But how do you do that if you don't have an environment that can do it for you?
I think that's why I think we're a really good example of an atypical monolith, right? It's something that is potentially decades old. It's evolved over time. It's in our case, it's patient centric. So validation and testing and verification and data consistency are super, super critical. And when you have a component of the system that is tested, it's trusted, it's reliable, it's working well, you don't want to change that. You don't necessarily want to mess with that thing, and it kind of generates this aversion to change. And I think that's why in a lot of these situations, it's kind of evolves and it grows and it just gets bolted on, and you're kind of extending it and you're adding pieces onto that puzzle, and it starts getting complicated. It starts getting hard to sort of maintain. It gets, in our case, loads and loads and loads of complicated tests, lots and lots of large, long-running test scenarios and other bits and pieces, which you have to do a lot of end-to-end testing, a lot of end-to-end sort of verification that becomes difficult for a dev team to kind of manage and look after.
So speaking of, because another question did come in a second ago about how developers themselves use this. From an enterprise perspective, Orkes has a really nice graphical user interface, but there's also APIs you can use too. On the open source side, there is a UI, but it's scant in details, which is fine. Like that's intended. It's primarily designed as a developer tool. So on the dev side, when you're building out your app, how are you typically interacting with that platform? Or does it just become kind of I shouldn't say simply become, but does it become kind of the back end that you're just dropping stuff on? Or how do you find yourself interacting with the platform to then build out what you need?
So we kind of got two points of entry, I think. No, actually probably three. So we've got 3 points. 3 points we're kind of touching on the Conductor ecosystem, or the Conductor solution, if you will. So the first one is our workers. So what we've been doing is breaking those complicated behaviors into silos. Now, in some cases, that's kind of generating essentially a modular monolith, and in some cases, that's actually a genuine microservice, proper. But what that is allowing us to do is kind of pull those complexities out, move them into something that is manageable, it's testable. In essence, it's allowing us to grow our testing and our verification, and we're actually able to do more on that front, which is really, really important. But essentially we've got these sort of workers, right? The next piece we've got is the Conductor UI. That's the piece that you touched on, which is very much a dev platform. I think in the OSS world, super useful for the dev team. Gives them a really nice, easy touch point. They can see what's running in the environment. They can see, search for workflows, search for tasks, see the definitions and that type of stuff. And I can actually sort of touch on that in a second. I can show you some of that stuff and show you some of what we've been doing. The other part, which I think is really, really cool, is where we've integrated Conductor into our UIs. And again, I can kind of demonstrate some of that, but where we're actually bringing that Conductor ecosystem in, coupling that with what we're doing in our UIs, which lets us really bring humans into the loop, which for something like what we do, which is highly subjective, very, very complicated, and sometimes, it rather than writing 500 if statements and switch statements and all sorts of other complications in your code, it's far easier just to say, ask someone, just get a human, ask a person, and get them to sort of answer that question.
That's almost the epitome of or the showcase of a human-centric task in a workflow. Like, I know that conversation has come up many times with others in the community I've seen in our Slack channel, where they pop up and they're asking questions about how to manage human tasks and things of that nature. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a developer by trade, but I've been around it enough that when I see these conversations pop up, what's usually coming to mind for me is, why do you need that right now? And that's less of a challenge and more of a, I'm genuinely curious. Why is this necessary? And this is an interesting, the Multilex and what you're doing at FDB is a really interesting example of why it's necessary in many cases to have the flexibility where a human task can be brought into the loop, because you need, it's like you said, in certain places, it's simply, it's not even that it's not possible to automate. Maybe it could be, but it's almost like saying in the today's world with AI, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things we can use AI for, but there's some things we probably should never use AI for. We need to have a human looking at that artifact or that process flow to make sure that the level of subjectivity is on a human to reason out, and not a flow or a system or an AI, an agent, something to that effect.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's some things which shouldn't be automated, shouldn't be an AI thing. I think patient care is a prime example of that sort of space and that sort of world where really you want to, if you're a patient, you're in a hospital, you want to trust that someone's eyeballed this stuff and they've checked it and they know, looking at your complicated care pathway, that it's all being looked after and managed properly. But at the same time, there's so many things that are ineffective or inefficient for a person to be doing. If it's copying and pasting, if it's just typing stuff in, if it's or transposing, or very, very simple actions and repetitive actions, which are obviously AI and things like that, really, really, really powerful tools to solve problems in. It's so much more effective, I think, if you can just automate what is automatable and then break out and get a person to deal with that inherent complexity.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those, I think it's the long running sort of conversation, even back to basics. It's the long running conversation of, like, I worked in the networking industry for a long time, so people would say this, that the well-known certification that was like the top end of things. Well, if I'm this, that's why I'm valuable. And my thought was always, if that's the only reason you're valuable, you're not. You don't have much value. The value you and our other guests bring in, and other people who are watching the stream right now bring in, is not that you know all the things, that you've passed a cert. That's not the value. The value is you're a human being and you know how to reason things out. You know how to sit down and say, how can I make this
Yeah.
system better? How can I solve those complex problems in really interesting, creative ways that can do something meaningful for where I work or the project I'm on?
Yeah.
Rather than saying, I know all the commands to automate all the things. Like, that's useful, but to your point, that's where AI agents can come into play to do that, some of that stuff for us. A human doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily add a lot of value to that. It's the other side. But yeah, did you want to switch over and show us a little something?
Yeah.
All right.
So what I've done is I've knocked up a
Do me a favor, actually, before you get in there, do me a favor and hit the little screen share button on your window, so I can get your
bear with
video
me.
in, so everyone can see it.
I've made a boo boo here.
Oh, you're okay.
I'm gonna have to rejoin. Is that okay?
That's okay. Yeah, we can do that. I'll switch over and bring Dale in for a quick chat
Yeah.
while you are doing that. No problem.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's okay.
Sorry, it's my fault. I've made a mistake.
It's okay. It's all good.
We'll rejoin.
There's a really good question that came in that Dale and I can tackle for a couple minutes. So you rejoin,
Go for it.
and we'll come right back.
Be back in just
Dale,
a second.
I switch over to you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jeff?
I am fantastic. We can do a quick intro for you now,
Yes.
and then we can do a longer
Yeah.
intro here in a few minutes. So do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yep. So I'm Dale Brady. I've worked for ReliaQuest, my current company, for coming up on 6 years nearly, I believe. I'm a principal engineer there. I started when we were kind of like a 6, 7, 8, 9-man dev team, and I've kind of weathered out the storm since and kind of marched forward with kind of what we're building out. So
That's cool.
I've,
Awesome. Hey, so while we're waiting for Dan to get back, and I don't want to take in too much away from you because we got a whole section just for you, but a question did come back in that I want to throw up on the screen, and the person asking doesn't think it's related, but I think it totally is related. Which is, this person is not much of a contributor to open source today, but looking at a new job switch for layoffs, lots of stuff going on. And as part of that, they're very curious if contributing to open source is either primal, or I'll take that as a either integral part or a very beneficial thing to do when you're getting into this industry. I have my own thoughts on that, but as a developer, I'm curious what you think.
I think it goes both ways. So you can look at it from kind of I view development kind of as a problem solving. You're either solving your own problem, or you're going to solve someone else's problem, or someone's going to help solve your problem. And I think when you kind of come across projects like Conductor, or even a lot of open source software, when you implement it, you're going to find these kind of edge cases of like, hey, I want to do this way. And this is where open source software shines, is that you can commit back to the repository. You can kind of help push them along. You get the benefit. They start kind of supporting it then. And honestly, that's something that even I did early on with Conductor, is kind of start pushing back to the code base there and help contributing. There was an issue kind of we were experiencing when we first kind of started rolling out Conductor, and we made the quick fix, pushed it back up, and it was mainlined, I think, with inside 2 or 3 days. And it's one of those edge cases that only we would necessarily come across, but it's super helpful, and it helps everyone else that uses the software. So I don't necessarily see it as a must do, but I definitely kind of see it as see a problem,
Yeah,
fix a problem kind
I like
of a way. So
I have a lot of questions to ask her. I at least have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to switch back. Dan is back. We're going to do that. Then we'll come to you, and then Tech Pause. Hopefully that helped a little bit, and we'll dive further into it in the Q&A section at the end. So I'm going to switch back over to Dan and his screen share. And Dan, let me pull your screen in. It's okay. A little technical difficulties, but that's all right. Oh, that is not you there, Dan. Oh, did I lose Dan? I did. We've got his screen share, but we don't have Dan's video. That's all right. Let me come back to Dale. Dale, I have you on the screen here, and I think we lost Dan's video. Let me let him know.
no
That's okay.
problem.
That's all
Yeah.
right. It's always the fun of, there's always a demo. We got to sacrifice a little bit more.
Always.
We got to sacrifice
Always.
a little bit more to the demo gods before we start any live streaming. That's just how it is. Let me bring Dan into the stream here. Let's bring you in. All right, we'll assign that. All right. Switch back over to Dan. Dan Miller, there you are. Let's bring in your screen share. Hopefully. There we go. I think that's going to work now.
Cool.
All right. Have at it, my friend.
Hopefully this will work. Yeah, hopefully I feel like I've been cursed enough already so far.
It's okay, man. Like I told Dale, we always got to sacrifice just a little bit more to the demo gods whenever we start a new stream. So that's okay. It's all right.
Okay, so what I've got here is kind of a really simplistic workflow, but what it's doing is it's tackling something that's like quite subjective, right? So it's going to get a joke. Okay, it's going to ask someone to assess that joke and say, is that a good joke? Yes or no. Just for context, these are all bad jokes, but we'll pretend that they're good. And then what it's going to do is going to send a notification. Okay, so what it's kind of showing is like how humans in the loop fit into the equation. It's also showing how something can be distributed. So just I've got a little diagram here to kind of articulate this, but this has actually got two different halves of the service. So we've actually got some stuff that's running on my machine, and then we've got some stuff that's running in Azure, and these are actually split onto two different services. So we've got a service that's dealing with notifications, and we've got a service that's dealing with human tasks and the human-centric sort of stuff. Okay. So looking at the workflow very quickly, it's going to get the joke. It's going to assess that joke. So it's going to ask someone to assess that. It will then say, was the response a good or a bad? And then it's going to send a notification back to us. So if I hop onto this and we run that through, what we should see is that's processed that. The service that gives us a joke is giving us a joke. And then what it's doing is it's waiting for someone to assess that. And what we've got over here is we've got a UI that we use. This is used for some of our processing. It's one of our human-centric or human task UIs. And what it's doing is it's asking someone, can you just give me some feedback on this? So the whole idea is for us, this would be a kind of free-for-all sort of area. Someone will come in, they'll grab that task, they'll process that task, and then move it on. In this case, it's assessing that joke. So I've assigned that, grab that, and it's saying here, before you criticize someone, walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you do criticize them, you're a mile away, and you have their shoes. So very typical dad joke, right? So it's asking us, because you laughed, I'm going to say this is a good joke. And then what that should do is move the workflow on, and then it's going to push out a notification here. So this bot that we have over here is now sending us a notification saying, here's a joke for you. And then that's all good. Conversely, what we could do is we can run that again, just to sort of demonstrate, the other sort of route. We should get, there we go. So we got another joke here. I was at the park wondering why this frisbee keeps getting bigger. Then it hit me. Let's say that's a bad joke. It is a bad joke. Let's be honest. So what we'll do is we'll send that, and it's just then sent a notification saying that this is a bad joke. So what you can see is that these states, nicely observable, but the most important part is something that's highly subjective. Which is like a joke, and whether or not a joke is a good joke. I mean, that's obviously up to personal preference, I guess, but it's allowed us to kind of crowdsource that and say, get a person to do that action and say yes or no, say whether that's good, say whether that's valid, and then the system can carry on processing it. And then we can bolt on extra tasks. We could just basically start sticking other bits and pieces into that workflow, and allow us to kind of maximize that human effort rather than trying to create really complicated, very difficult, very brittle, quite often, pieces of code to tackle, or AI to tackle those subjective issues.
Sorry, I was trying to come off mute there so I could say something to you. We'll switch back over to the two of us here for a sec. Because because I was trying to come onto your screen share and not your screen. Sorry, everyone. It's all right. There he is. First off, all the dad jokes were hilarious. I was trying to catch a frisbee and it hit. I was trying to what was the joke? Say it again.
I was at the park wondering why a frisbee kept getting bigger, then it hit me.
These
So
are glorious.
bad.
I mean, I'm just going to say this right now that, like, yes, we're here to solve complex problems. And I know everyone watching now or NTM replay is going to like, tell me how I solve the real big problems. But let's be honest, dad jokes, I mean, that's clearly a common
Yeah.
use case and a necessary use case for what we do. We cannot take ourselves too seriously. So let's just say that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the ability to. There's a couple things in what you were showing that I liked. One of them is that you're able to bring in these complex tasks, these diverse tasks for the various things that you're needing to get completed, which is obviously what a tool like Conductor does. But something else I found really interesting is the interface that may have gone unnoticed by others, but the actual graphical interface that you're using for Conductor there, and if you can't talk about it too much, it's okay. But it obviously, or I should say, it differs from even the current UI that you would get if you went and cloned the repo right now. And whether you want to talk in detail about that or not, I wanted to call that out because to me it's a clear example of why working with open source can actually be a really great starting point for you.
Yeah.
Because it shows, at least in my opinion, it shows that what you've built shows the flexibility in taking something where it is right now and then customizing it to what you need in your environment to solve your problem. And then some amount of that, to TechBoss's question earlier, some amount of that might be really beneficial to contribute back into the community that isn't IP or secret sauce for your own business. But things like that can be really useful because others, and Dale mentioned this in an earlier question, that could be a problem. People are like, oh my gosh, I really been looking for something like this, but I didn't know what to do next. And so people wanting to contribute back into a project like that can really benefit others too.
Yeah, I think, and I think we've that's one of the biggest strengths for us with this being open source. So in this situation, we've basically taken the Conductor API and the Conductor services, and we've kind of skinned it over with our own implementation. This one is kind of quite blunt, but we are working on things that are much more integrated. So rather than people having to break out of their tools and their sort of workflow, if you will, inside of the application is bringing to them the things they need that needs input or needs decisioning or needs rationalization. So that being open source has kind of accelerated parts of that for us. I mean, Orkes have got some amazing APIs. It's not to say we couldn't do it on that front. It's not at all. And that is definitely a valid route. But by having the open source version, we can tweak it, tailor it, like you say, customize some of those bits and pieces to fit our sort of use case. And I think the other thing that we found on that sort of front as well was the kind of the client side of it. So what we did was we took in this case we used predominantly C#. We took that C# SDK, and then we kind of created a customized variation of that, which has basically got all of our opinionated specific implementations that we require built into it. So rather than our devs having to recreate all of that boilerplate every single time, we've kind of just baked it in and we've said, right, we want it to work like this. It needs to do this. So we have got certain types of binding, verification, failure, sort of failure conditions, monitoring, and all of these sorts of opinionated things and stuff. And by being open source, that makes it a lot easier for us to plug those things in, to create those wrappers or create those extensions, and all of that type of stuff, which again, for something that's medical, where testing and verification is such an integral part of it, it just makes that world easier. It's a lot easier to do that sort of testing and that verification if you're owning it and you can control it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I can definitely see a use case, or I can imagine a set of use cases where you could go even further beyond, and you probably have thought about this or are already working on it, further beyond the interface, the graphical interface side of things, to like make it work the way you need it to work. But you could easily do something very similar and bring it into your core application, whatever your business happens to be. In your case, the medical app, that could be run, or if there's a provider out there that is tapping into this system, their side of the system, it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine that some part of the monitoring or availability information could be put into that same tooling for IT operators or other system operators to be aware that there's a problem going on in the back end, something might be happening, et cetera, in a way that is not exposing necessarily a task or a worker or things of that nature or some part of the actual workflow, but the insight that comes from what is happening potentially could be shared in those other apps so that someone can say, oh, there might be an issue right now, or might be having an outage or whatever. And they could know that very, very quickly without having to, I have to log into Conductor to see, and I'm not an app dev, so I'm not sure what this is telling me. It's almost, I don't want to say this quite like this, but it's almost APM-like in that aspect where that type of data to a degree could be shared through API to other things, empowering them to be even more powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's like I think what we've really appreciated with Conductor is that, real ease of modularity, then bringing that orchestration, like Viren was saying, bringing that orchestration to the party and saying, right, this is how everything kind of glues together. It's very, very simple for us to bolt extra pieces into a process, tweak a process, grow a process, which is probably the most important part for us. We're evolving, we're growing this stuff. We don't want to revolutionize everything and kind of tear everything up. That is far, far too complicated, far too risky, right? It's just not the way we want to be doing it. We want to evolve. We want to improve our testing. We want to improve these things, and that kind of modularity, and then that observability, and the ability to have real sort of tie-in with the rest of the systems is really, really, really powerful. And it's not that complicated. It's not that difficult to get started. You can kind of chuck these things together quite quickly. You can start simple, and simple means simple. I think there's a lot of these technologies that we kind of looked at, and we've even experimented with a couple of different platforms and different technologies that were very difficult to get started, and there was quite a high cost to getting it integrated. And we found with Conductor, it's very, very simple. It's very easy. It scales, it grows, and we can kind of evolve that forward, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to have high, costly implementations.
So you're spending the intent there is basically spending less time managing a tool and more time operating the business and solving the problems you need to solve, and patient care and prescription analytics and all that type of stuff. And then the platform is just providing what you need to do that, which is really good.
Exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Awesome, man. That was fantastic. Thank you for showing. Do you mind hanging around so we can do some Q&A here a little bit with Dale after he wraps up? Fantastic. Then I'm going to switch over and bring Dale back in. Thank you again, Dan. Dale, welcome back to the party. For anybody who wasn't watching a few minutes ago when you jumped on and helped out, would you mind doing kind of a reintroduction?
Yes. So, my name's Dale. I am a principal software engineer for ReliaQuest. I've worked there going on 6 years now, and it's been fun to say the least. We started as a small dev team, and we've grown rather quickly and at an insane pace as well. In fairness, from where we've gone to where we are now, honestly, is actually pretty surprising. I think we run about 160, 170 microservices now. So like I'll get into that in a little bit, but like where we came from, even I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. So
that's wild. So the first question I have for you, and we were touching the, actually we're going to come back to a question we were doing earlier. Mm-hmm. So we were talking a bit about open source, and you were helping to answer TechBoz's question from the chat, which I will bring back up for anyone who missed it earlier. You can see this. Let me bring this back on the screen here so everyone can kind of see this as a reference. So you were talking a bit about how contributions can help and they can really help other people. And something I wanted to follow up with you on that is, yes, absolutely everything you said, that it can, problems you are solving or ways that you come across to solve your own problems for your business, for your application, something you're developing, contributing that back into the open source project so others can benefit from that too, makes a lot of sense. There's something also came to mind for me as somebody who, always aspiring to learn to be a developer and kind of like better empathize and understand doing community work the way that I do it. I really want to have a better understanding always of sort of the plight of developers and what people are going through to see where can we bring them in, where can people be helped, etc. And it gets me thinking that open source contributions to open source work, using open source projects, but then contributing back to the project and the community can also be very valuable in the connecting with other people sense. It could also be very valuable in the learning sense, because if you're going to contribute technically back into a project, you're generally contributing some code or some other updates. And I'm curious from your perspective how that has benefited or how you've experienced that in your career.
So, in I actually see this in a different way. I can actually let me flip that slightly. I see this. I'm actually active on the Slack for the Conductor OSS and honestly the Orkes Slack. And like you were saying, kind of a lot of questions come in about how, what, all of those different things, and the support in someone always has an answer to a problem, and that community is very, very good. There's someone that's done something similar, and there's people that I've seen the problem come up, and I'm like, oh, I know the answer to this one. And the kind of the feedback and the engagement that occurs in there around an open source tool is honestly extremely surprising. Normally you can go on a GitHub, GitLab, you'll see kind of a list of, here's an issue, how do I do this, I have a problem, and back and forth, and kind of it dies out. Whereas the even Viren's very, very active in answering things. He's answered some stuff for me quite frequently as well, which has helped us as a company. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but the engagement and feedback portion of the open source community, I think, is kind of the core of it nearly as well.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. And actually, from the interactions I've seen, it has led me to believe something very similar that I've seen in other communities as well, which is it's as much about the technology as it is about the people who are around you and who are also like can empathize with and can understand what you're dealing with, even if it's not your exact challenge or the exact problems you're trying to solve. They can empathize and understand how you're going about trying to solve a problem. And they might see it and go, oh, you know what? You're trying this way. Did you know you could also solve that problem a slightly different way, also with the same project or tooling that you're trying to do, that might make it a little bit simpler, or I should say, or could just be something that resonates with that person. Like I've had this happen for me many times where I'm trying to solve a problem with a particular tool set and it's just not working for me. And I find out later when I go talk to somebody who's like, oh, Jeff, hang on a sec. Here's an alternative way to do that. And I realize, oh my gosh, that makes more sense, because the other way, I didn't understand why it was supposed to fix the problem. And so anytime an issue would come up, or a challenge a roadblock would come up in front of me, I wouldn't know what to do next, because I really didn't understand what I was doing. I was just parroting someone's documentation. So someone else gives me an alternate way to solve that problem, or an alternate way to build out that flow in the Conductor world or the microservices world. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And then it becomes, I don't want to say it becomes easy, but it becomes relatively easier to get through, because now you understand all the different steps it's going to take. And so if an issue pops up, it's within your wheelhouse. You've experienced it before, and you're like, oh, I know what to do next. And it almost gets me thinking, kind of to reframe the point that I wanted to bring up and get your take on, is it's almost the contributing to the open source project, whether it's from a direct, I'm putting PRs in on a regular basis or submitting issues, and or also contributing to the conversation, like in Slack or in Discourse or wherever it happens to be, can be really useful for you as a person, even if you're not the one who's necessarily solving everything. Being a part of those conversations, you get to understand how other people are approaching these situations.
Yep. I fully agree. Being able to kind of witness the back and forth, or just it goes back to kind of you were saying earlier on about the blank piece of paper, and if you're drawing a blank piece of paper and kind of you're witness to the problem being solved, or kind of what's going on, you'll learn that one liner and you're like, I didn't know I could do that, or that's interesting. I can. Why didn't I know about this earlier? And it's you've seen how you've made the mistake kind of multiple times, and then you learn that new way, and you're like, wow, this has made my life really easy, really simple. And the open source community is great for that, of like, hey, try this one liner, or try do it this way, and reframe either your mind or your solution or your problem into this light. So
we so much get into that I know this is getting a little existential, but that sort of fixed mindset about how we do things because that's how we've done them. We're comfortable, and kind of trying to change that to a growth mindset, or even being willing to recognize that we're fixed on something and that we can pivot. Excuse me.
Good.
There's some colds going around the house. So pivoting into the actual tech itself, I wanted to kind of give you a chance to kind of wax poetic a little bit about the types of problems or things that you're able to share at work, and kind of what a platform like Conductor has helped with. And then even if you don't focus too much on Conductor itself, what it's allowed you to kind of, what questions and solutions it's allowed you to start exploring that you may not have been able to do before.
Yep. So Conductor made its way into our system about 3 years ago. And we started with the typical monolithic architecture. All the servers were tightly coupled, single code base. It worked well. We had a small dev team. We had a single stack. We had fewer dependencies. Made life real easy. It was fine. We were able to kind of get code out the door till a point. And then the scalability issues set in, and traffic increased. It became harder to kind of scale the application. Then you're, okay, how do I make a monolith do this, or how do I kind of go this way, or how do I go that way? And so you're duplicating parts of the code to try and split the problem or move the problem in different areas. And then kind of the development bottleneck starts setting in. Developers kind of started coming on in the dozens at that rate. We hired extremely aggressively, and as a result, our development cycle started to grow exponentially, as well as then these release cycles. So it was maybe about a year in, after I started, that the idea of microservices essentially started kind of becoming we need microservices, we need to go this way, we need to do this. And it again, that every people have been there for a year, they've built this monolith, they're looking at it going, there's nothing wrong, it's fine. And you're kind of having to change the mindset to, let's go towards kind of the microservice route. So we realized that kind of overcoming these challenges and to scale effectively, we did need to break up this monolith into smaller manageable services. And you get kind of the usual independent scalability. It fixed the development stuff. We were able to kind of jump to kind of pretty much a CI/CD, like straight to master style deployment strategy. And it also helped them with our fault isolation. The benefits were clear, but as we kind of transitioned, we figured out that it wasn't really easy. We started running into like, oh, this service will talk, and now service B stops listening, and issues like that, where it's like, okay, I can spend some time going to figure out, and a week later you're probably no better off. And it was honestly at this point where we started seeing these kind of disconnects or services dropping in and out, or things starting to not play nice with one another, that we started looking more and more at, cool, how can we use Rabbit more effectively, or how can we use Kafka more effectively, or how can we use these event-driven systems better than what we're currently doing? And we leaned in pretty hard, and we kind of just kept pushing the boat out more and more. It wasn't until we needed honestly a state machine that Conductor started rearing its head as a potential for us. And as we weighted up with kind of like Cadence and all these other tools, but Conductor, it's Spring Boot, it has all the SDKs, you can jump in and out of Python, like it had everything, whereas these other tools necessarily, they weren't finished. There was no the documentation's kind of sporadic. The development experience of it alone, of trying to even like test out these individual different systems, was torture, until I came to Conductor, did a one-liner and started up and went, oh, this is great. Okay. And I started digging in more and more, started seeing kind of how it sits alongside services rather than becomes part of a whole orchestration system. That's really what hooked us. And it might have actually gone. We slept on it maybe a little bit earlier, but Dan actually showed an example there of how he was running a microservice locally, or I believe 2 microservices locally, but also 2 in Azure. And I don't know where Conductor was running in that situation, but the difference being there is that he actually showed the ability of the kind of cross-cloud, cross-region, cross-AZ stuff that Conductor supports, which a lot of tools don't work that way. And the way Conductor is kind of designed helps that. And I don't want to dig into that too much. I would definitely say go look at the code, kind of go dig in a bit more, and you do a little bit of reading. It has a lot of cross-cloud, cross-region failover goodness built in. But
I'm definitely making a note of that so we can bring it up with
Yeah.
Dan if he's interested in talking
Yeah.
about it here in a little while.
So as we brought Conductor in, we still had microservices, but we had like 10, 12, and essentially they became we had kind of the internal term, these macro monoliths. And they worked, they scaled, they helped us achieve, and kind of we were always kind of at that point where we had what we needed there and then, but we never had the runway. And so we were always kind of playing this game of trying to catch up to how can we scale to 2x, how can we scale to 4x, how can we do this exponential scaling. And with ReliaQuest's goal at its most basic form is to cut down the noise of cybersecurity. We're playing a game of chasing. Essentially, we're chasing, trying to catch up to the massive amounts of cybersecurity data that can be collected, moved through the system, analyzed, etc. So you're already on this kind of like downward trajectory that you're like, okay, how do I even this out? How do I flatten this out? And this is Conductor played a pivotal point in being able to actually break these macro monoliths up, and it even does now, in that because of its nature of being able to define these tasks and essentially, as Viren was saying, wrap methods, wrap functions, and wrap code, we were able to essentially start breaking. We would first break these monoliths up and kind of workflowize them, I guess, or orchestrate them. Even though they'd all still be in the one service. But what it meant then is that we could take sections of code and start just dropping them in other services, and actually start breaking up these huge services with essentially, no, I am going to say about zero downtime, essentially, because we were able to move one and transition the workload seamlessly in the background. We didn't have to worry about feature flags. We didn't have to worry about anything because of Conductor's nature. It allowed us to break these problems down or section code off as we needed to kind of scale or analyze with the visibility and monitoring as well. So that in our landscape, as we leaned more and more into this, the development cycles started getting shorter and shorter, and the development of these features started becoming quicker and quicker. And we began to realize that we could quickly, instead of looking at it, typically you'd look at a problem from a business use case, and then you'll try break it down kind of in like an engineering requirements document, and how you can fulfill that from an engineering standpoint while trying to hit all the goals, or at the majority of. And we realized that we could start, instead of breaking them down from we need to use this, and this tooling, we already have the ability to do this. It's over here sitting in the system because we built it 2 years ago, and we can just reuse it. And we started looking at how we can build essentially this reusable tooling, deduplication or sanitization, or any of these highly scalable features, essentially, to start building out different business use cases at Orque. The trying to be a force multiplier and trying to push forward kind of the security game. Every company's trying to do it, and so it's It is how quickly can you get there, how quickly can you stand on it, and how fast and effective can you deliver. And so that has been pivotal, beneficial, and pivotable for us in the market. There we go.
Words, man. It's okay. Words.
Words.
It's fine.
So the state management you kind of gained in their system thereafter, and the service coordination has really shifted kind of our developer mindsets. It's not easy doing distributed systems. Some companies do across cloud. They have high availability. They have multiple layers of redundancy, and we didn't really have to worry about it because we kind of just built our cloud architecture, dropped kind of Conductor on top, and just ran kind of replicas of what we needed, and they just kind of flip flop between each other. As if something dies, the other one kind of takes over, and away it goes. So we
not to like interrupt your story too much here, and I
you're good.
apologize. I apologize for like inserting into the flow, but you're reminding me of a past life, past company that I worked for, and in the days of everyone's going to the cloud. That lovely big air quote phrase of like, if you weren't a startup who was born in, because why would you have a data center? You would just stand up in AWS or GCP or whatever it happened to be. You would, these bigger companies or mid-sized companies were like, we're going to move to the cloud because why would we have physical data centers and servers anymore? And it felt silly to us who worked in the industry because it's like, that's not going to work. You're not going to go, and you'd hear the C-levels because they need to say the things, et cetera. And it was a lot of like pontificating, and I understand why, but the reality is you're never, in those cases where you're completely physically built inside of your own systems and servers and data centers, even if you did have a microservices architecture for your customer app or whatever product you have out there, you're not going to completely move into a fully cloud native environment. One, it takes way too much time and energy and money to do. And then you realize, as most companies did, that it became way too expensive to do what they were doing, because the problem was they would always try to take this, as you said it, these macro monoliths or these full-on monoliths and break them down into something that could be just run in the cloud. And that's not how it works. You need something that almost is re-architected completely from scratch. But if you're already at the point that you have something built, you might bring in a developer team who can do that, but they're going to want to build something out that is designed to be cloud native. And the company largely would see that and go, wait, hold on a second, but that's not what we want. We just need to get over there. It's like, that's not, it's almost like trying to cross the bridge over the River Kwai. Like there's no easy way to make that jump. And so what you're describing, this having a platform that can be built out in this way almost creates the ability to not have to even ask that question. It can just simply be, here's the platforms that we have out there for, our hosting services. So one could even be DR if you really needed a physical location someplace, because it largely doesn't matter at that point. This is almost playing an abstraction layer for you to say, where am I just going to have stuff running whenever I need it? I focus more on building the application itself.
Yep. And I totally agree with that. It does provide that kind of, if we had this 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when that kind of change was happening of going towards the cloud and kind of that movement, it would have provided the perfect framework of just wrap your service, ship it, and away you go. You don't have to worry about it again. Whereas now you kind of have, now you have the opposite problem. Everyone's building microservices in the hundreds, if not thousands, depending on where, and then you're getting lost in the noise. Essentially, you've Grafana dashboards upon Grafana dashboards and alerting systems upon alerting systems.
For anyone watching, no shade to Grafana. We love our friends at Grafana. Grafana is beautiful. No shade.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just the amount of metrics that you simply have trying to keep a team focused with all of these microservices and trying to maintain a 95% SLA uptime, 99.999999 recurring for infinity uptime. It becomes extremely challenging in terms of disaster recovery, high availability, and the workload and the work effort that goes into making sure that that's all maintained. And it feels like Conductor kind of makes it feel like you're kind of cheating the system. It just it works. You just have your basic infrastructure and you let it run, and away you go. You can kind of take your eye off the ball. And we run massive amounts of data through ours in upwards of terabytes. And we run on average about 10 million of these workflows a day. And those workflows have anywhere between 10 tasks. One of them, I think, has upwards of 40 to 50. And we can drop in and out this business logic on the fly. We can put things into essentially what we would call transparent mode, where we can kind of like pipe data off to the side because we need to test something along the way without disrupting the business, the typical business flow that's going on, or the impact on the customer side, where they may get a notification or they may get kind of an update as to the status of something. They're none the different, but in the meantime, we're still able to develop this software on the side. So it has helped us, given our kind of essentially straight to master strategy. It has helped us be able to bring on these microservices, test them before they even need to go live. We can tweak on the fly, and we can kind of even get some metrics around a lot of these services and scale them before they ever even see public facing or feature level loads.
Yeah, and you had mentioned when we spoke before, and you mentioned here a little bit ago, in the world of security, there's so much data that can be ingested and is generated from any type of hardware appliance, system, feed, whatever it happens to be, that it will continue to be a nonstop, I don't know if I would say battle, but challenge to sort that data out in ways that is viable for whatever industry you're in, from healthcare to payment systems to retail to banking. It doesn't really make any difference what it is. There's just so much of it. And so to your point a moment ago about being able to spin up a new service quickly and deploy it pretty seamlessly, if with any impact really at all, when something pops up, they're like, oh, we really need to address this, or a new use case has come up or something, and need to be able to get in there and create some new artifact or some new component of your architecture to support a new customer or an existing customer or a new problem they face with this much data processing, or really the levels of CVEs that come out on a regular basis and security issues that pop up. Like, they have to be addressed fast. They can't. No company wants to be the headline who didn't address that security patch last week. Nobody wants that. No, for whatever reason it happens to be. So I can imagine you're in a unique position in that way, that you need, like, it's a requirement to be able to, in a similar way that it's a requirement for Dan and his company to be able to, and many others, to deploy these things quickly, but also know that they're going to work the way they need to very, very effectively right away. I could see that being like almost a necessity.
That's it. That's nearly 50-50 split. Half of our job is kind of like writing code. The other half is making sure that we're not introducing latency, we're not causing problems, we're not introducing faults. There was a point where we were tracking a logarithmic, like, nanosecond issue that just exponentially would kind of delay things, and then it would kind of disappear and it would come back, and we were chasing our tails for ages. It would introduce maybe a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds of latency, but it that 2-3 seconds of latency, when you're trying to get something to a person, or write an update, or even just info back to us on the system, when we're doing 10 million of them, it stacks.
Yes.
And so everything kind of shifts left of where it should be. And so Conductor, and being able to isolate kind of the single issue before we released any of this, and kind of figure out why and what and where of running these tests back to back, we were able to just essentially we were able to just set up quartz, tell Conductor, hey, run 10,000 of these back to back, and we were able to graph kind of the execution times as we were kind of changing and tweaking code. And it helped us just kind of diagnose, okay, cool, right, if we use this, we gain 0.5 of a second. If we don't do this, we lose here. So we're able to kind of just step through a lot of it. And there was obviously the point of sitting there reading code and kind of figuring, okay, well, this doesn't help us, and this doesn't help us, and this doesn't help us. But it helped us kind of just do it in a very quick, condensed cycle. The added benefit of doing all of this is that we can also just hand up kind of essentially Excel graphs of, like, hey, here's the response time, here's the average throughput, here's this, here's that. That's what it's scaled for. We're able to store all this documentation with the microservices. So we we have like known load limits, known where we're going to start entering issues. If we need to auto scale on some stuff, we're able to monitor any of the queues that we need. We're able to monitor Conductor, and we kind of get this very elastic, spongy environment that requires little to no work other than kind of just build and build and build.
Mm-hmm.
So it is what we kind of get stuck at now is, do we use Conductor or not? Because we found that we were kind of leaning on it so much that we were doing very simple. We kind of swung the pendulum so far the other way.
Yeah.
We were okay, well, this is a very simple task. We don't really need Conductor to do this. We can just make the single REST request and we're done. And that kind of became its own battle between kind of like the ARC group of like, okay, but the resiliency we get, the retriability we get, kind of the failures, the notification, the everything else. We started looking at how mission critical things are rather than the right way of doing it from an architectural perspective of like, what should we do? We were kind of just leaning on it, and it became essentially another tool in our belt as to,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds weird as I say this out loud, but it became a tool in our belt, and it's how mission critical is the problem.
I totally agree. And actually, if it's cool with you, I'd like to bring Dan back in.
Absolutely.
Right now, let me switch over and bring you both here. Dan, I think you are still there, right? There you are. I got you on the screen. I think we can hear you. I wanted to bring you back in because I think what you just said, Dale, is really important. And I know I touched on it briefly earlier from my own experiences, but I think both of you have a unique viewpoint on this that would be great to discuss, which is, when is the right time to use? And I hesitate to. We've said the word tool. I hesitate too much to lean into the word tool too much for Conductor, because it is obviously a lot more than that. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll say that it's a really interesting point to bring up, to say, when, as a human or as the architect or somebody who can reason this stuff out, when is the right time to use a tool or an automation to do that thing, or should we just do it a different way because this situation calls for something different? And I think that's a really interesting thing that I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on, because it is very easy when you get into any tool, any automation, any script that you use, it's like, man, this made it so easy to then, the whole hammer and nail thing. Everything, if all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. It's like, great, I have this tool, I can use it everywhere. But then you start to, at some point, hopefully ask yourself the question, like, is that the right thing to do in this situation? And obviously there's some cons to that, but I feel like there's some pros there too. And I don't know, Dan, I'd love to get your take on what Dale was saying.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what Dale's saying now kind of resonates with us. I mean, I think we're far more earlier in our journey. We're about a year and a bit now into our sort of like, journey using Conductor, but I recognize so much of what he's saying there. And I think, like, it's kind of to go to your point there, Jeff, and your question, I suppose. The point that's right, it is a difficult one, because there's always that issue with, I mean, I'm a software developer. I'm an inherent geek, nerd, whatever. New shiny things. I'm like a flipping magpie, right? It's like, oh, it's technology, and it does something magical, whatever. But like,
if I had a unicorns and rainbows graphics, I would flash it across the screen. That's exactly what it feels like.
And it's like it's kind of what motivates us, right? It's what drives us, and I think that is important, right? It's just it's a piece of our kind of fabric and being that we love to just mess around with stuff, right? But I think the thing that was quite interesting with Conductor, and I think it was, Dale was kind of pointing out there that starting off simple is easy. And there is definitely room where you could argue, well, why bother? Why do that? What was the purpose, right? But as soon as you break out of that small scale, as soon as things start getting more complicated, as soon as you start getting to multiple services needing to work together to genuinely maintain that decoupling and that separation of responsibility that Viren was kind of talking about at the beginning, like, it's very, very easy to get into a situation. It's something that we kind of hit on quite early on in our journey before we were using Conductor, that services being aware of other services kind of inherently by what they were messaging, like they were messaging something that was essentially only consumed by those things, and you know, you end up with sort of like almost like a soft coupling, you know, and a bit of a pollution of behaviors and stuff. You know, by starting off early, by keeping that simple, like that joke workflow that I was kind of, you know, showing earlier, you know, yeah, you could just write that in an application. It's no problem. But if you're going to scale this out, if your, you know, roadmap is that you're growing this, you know, you are going to be ingesting huge quantities of data, and that is going to have loads and loads of complexity inside of it, and various different services doing bits and pieces. It's a great place to start off simple, evolve, grow. Your dev team then has opportunity to kind of engage with it, learn, you know, grow with your platform. Yeah, I think that's.
I'd agree, and that's we tried to provide a very similar experience. We didn't want to move fully away from. They are microservices at their core. We want to treat them as microservices. We still have all of our tasks are still accessible via REST and via any of the requests that we need, but Conductor can also make requests to them. So we get that kind of hybrid style approach where we can still treat them as typical microservices. We can still build against them in a typical microservice paradigm, however we choose to, but we also get the added benefit of being able to move kind of both sides of the fence as we need to walking forward. So I think I don't think there's a wrong time to ever jump into kind of the world of orchestration or kind of the jumping on this. I think now is nearly becoming a necessity going forward, simply because of the way paradigms are being set up, or the way Spring Boot expects certain things, or the way kind of the Django frameworks expect certain things. You kind of start walking towards this path once you start coupling lots and lots of these different third-party tools together. You need kind of a common tiebreaker.
Yeah, that leads to a question I wanted to toss out to both of you is, and I was going to do this in a bit of a lightning round, but I think it probably will might end up going a little ways. So I want to ask, on that note of, I'll just say on that note, where would each of you suggest someone start when they're like considering the idea of a workflow of doing some kind of, we can even leave the term Conductor off for a moment or two, but someone thinking about, is this even a thing I should really be thinking about? Where would you say they start? And whoever wants to go first, go for it.
I'm British, so I'm going to be quiet and wait for Dale.
Okay. I would say I think you need to know. Like the white piece of paper comes back again. You kind of need to know and stare at a blank piece of paper and kind of have someone else in the room and go, "Hey, I have a problem," and just know that there's a solution. And I think the best way of kind of getting involved with and knowing how to use it and knowing when to is honestly just pull it down and sit there, do your hello world with it, and just build on it a little bit. It doesn't take long. It's very, very quick, especially with Conductor. It's very, very quick to put together kind of these test use cases. And I would definitely recommend not only thinking of it from an engineering standpoint of view, but think about the business impact, or think about the problem you're trying to solve from as if you were the end user receiving that solution. And I feel engineers don't necessarily always do that, but once you start to kind of sit on both sides of the fence of, I want it as quick as possible, I want it in a certain way, and the developer side of, how can I do that? And once you start bridging the gap on those two problems, you start to see the necessity for being able to do the retriability or any of the feature sets that you kind of get from a platform like Conductor. Honestly, I would just say pull it down, because it was a platform I didn't know just how impactful it was going to be in my career alone, let alone ReliaQuest's kind of mission statement, until I realized just how big the system had gotten and the adoption rate across our systems. It just kind of naturally grew into our software development lifecycle. So I go for it, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think you've got to almost dive in. Like, just I think if you can find something, and Viren touched on this, earlier. If you can find something that's asynchronous, that's quite a cool opportunity, because it kind of, I think it's a really good place to maximize what Conductor can kind of really do for you, right? If you've got an asynchronous long running process, is even better. Like ours, we started off with something that was actually big. We started off with a 300 step process, and what we did is we started off with by saying everything is a human centric task, and that's it. Like, there is no automation in it whatsoever at all. We just said this is all human centric, and it was our verification and publication process, and it's just loads and loads and loads of various different bits and pieces. But it was always a thing that was always loads and loads of opportunity for automation, but we just couldn't get to it. So I think if you can find something that's like a long big thing, that's like great for getting your immediate value kickback, if that's a need. That was a need for us. But I think just starting with something simple, exactly like Dale said, hello world. You can very, very quickly kind of get to grips with it, and it just snowballs from there. I think it's definitely what we've experienced. And I think the other thing as well, Dale, you mentioned was you can kind of have your cake and eat it. If you've got an existing fabric, that's fine. Like, we've got traditional microservices that have REST endpoints, and in fact, actually, we kind of leverage those extensively for like our UIs and our UI services, and those sorts of things. So it's yeah, you can mix it and slice it in loads of different ways. It's really cool.
And one of the things you said there, Dan, sorry, Dale, I knew you were going to jump in, but just to throw one thing, the comment about having a bunch of, almost starting with a bunch, not to say that everyone should do this, but almost starting with a bunch of human tasks as a beginning point in some cases could be really useful as a baby step into, maybe it's not say, as a first step, or step, not quite one, but 0.01, as that first thing to test out, to get a sense of what is going to happen and how it's going to work, rather than what might be perceived as handing off the steps, the flow to the tool first, and like, oh, it runs, I hope it runs properly. And instead start with human-centric things to begin with in a very small use case to verify and see it happen, so that you can feel comfortable that, okay, this is going to play out the way I wanted it to. I can now change that over to something that's more automated.
Yeah, exactly. And you're basically, you're maximizing your work not done. You're saying, I don't want to tackle all of this stuff. We know it works. We know it's fine. We know it's reliable. We know it's doing exactly what it said it did before. But I want to automate this piece. I want to get this service talking to this service. I want to sort of chain these kind of modules together and stuff like that. And then as you're kind of like breaking into that, exactly like Dale was saying, where you start creating repeatable and reusable components, and by thinking about reusability, you're kind of then building your own platform on top of a platform, and your dev team can then start again maximizing that that work not done, saying, well, we've already got that thing. So in our case, we created like a notification system. We've got a generic system for certain verification and validation steps now that we've kind of started proving out, and it's just it kind of almost becomes a bit of an ecosystem, your own ecosystem, though it's not, it's localized to yourself.
I love that. You also mentioned the idea of asynchronous apps could be really interesting. It could be a good place to start, as well as like obviously the hello world. I have a question actually for both of you, and this is more of a like kind of parroting or like championing the rest of the community members who may not be either as engaged as the two of you or would like to be more engaged. Who was on earlier asking some questions, and others out there who might be kind of curious about this. Are there? Would it be useful to have more executable, like immediately executable example apps or workflows that are already ready with the open source side, so someone could either just go grab it as I call it a demo or what have you. But you both got me thinking that it might be interesting to have more of that included in the when you pull it down, or maybe as a separate repository in the Conductor OSS kind of org overall, that someone could pull down and say, oh, that's the thing I really want to try. Because Dale, you brought it up again, and I know we like beaten that horse completely now, the blank piece of paper. But almost having a list of like simple use cases someone could look at and go, you know what, that actually really resonates with me. That's similar to what I'm thinking. They could go grab and deploy and see how it works, inject, maybe almost lab-like, give them some places where they can say, this is where you need to put some data in. This is where we want you to add a little something. I'm thinking, I'm just kind of thinking out loud a little bit, but I'm curious what both your thoughts are on that.
So that's an approach I actually used to help our developers kind of wrap their head around essentially the concept of Conductor and the ability that they can write this one small, like, give a man a fish, teach a man a fish. It was kind of that problem that we ran into, but being able to kind of give them this essentially demo environment that they could, I could show them, I could mirror our existing process alongside what we currently do or did to show them how they can kind of break up and essentially give them a relatable problem and as a way to visualize as well. And it didn't necessarily have to do anything, and they just kind of filled in some pieces and kind of just exactly as you were saying. But it definitely helped oh wait, that's really cool that I don't even have to think about any of this, or because there's a lot of problems disappear and you don't necessarily realize that they've gone. You just don't see them again once you kind of start using these tasks and kind of this retriability. It's like the load balancer disappeared for a second, or there was a problem here, or that happened there, and it's like you never see it again except when you go back looking at logs and you're like, oh, that happened.
It's interesting. You're almost describing a like a sandbox type thing where you can kind of play around a little bit with that use case and be like, what will happen if I do this? Or it's almost like A/B testing in the web or marketing world or any other world, really. Like, what happens when I try this, or I remove this piece? What happens there? And you could almost do it in your own use case that you just play with a little bit and see what. And also, to your point, you could be going through this and go, okay, that's really interesting. That's wait, hold on a second. I just saw this one component here in this flow, this demo flow, or this use case flow that I could build off of. I didn't know you could do that. Wait, or that's how that's supposed to work? I didn't realize that's how that's supposed to operate. It's not been working for me. This is what it should look like. That opens up a whole world of like possibilities. Yeah. One of the things I always think of as somebody who wants to get people, it's not so much the importance of getting people into Conductor specifically. It's the importance of showing people out there who don't know a better way to do this or are looking for a better way. Like both of you did at your own points and being like, oh, this platform really helps solve problems that we didn't know we could solve quite this easily. Or there's a lot of other options, but this one does it just so much better. I've used this phrase before, and it's been, I think, probably overused, but I'll say it anyway. It almost the idea of the art of the possible, being able to show people like what is possible when you are able to spend 5 minutes on this. Now consider if you spent 10 or 15 or 20, what else could you do that's really cool? And that's something that's really meaningful to me is from what both of you were saying, and I'm hoping that others in the community that are watching who have either tried it or not tried it can see this and kind of start asking themselves, what would it be helpful for me as step one? Like almost like the person who's neurodivergent going to the gym. Step one is not get in your car and go to the gym. It's stand up from my chair. walk to the door, walk down the stairs. Like those are the steps. When someone says, just go to the gym, it's like, that's not how that works. But in this case, it's almost like analogous to what we're talking about here, where it's like, what is the very first thing that person could do? And if we give them some use cases, maybe it takes away the blank paper and gives them at least the worksheet that the teacher gave that they can start drawing in. So at least it's something and not nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you can have, if you've got those kind of like, you know, I don't know, but like boilerplate workflows that kind of explain some of, like, exactly like you're saying, like the art of the possible, like what Conductor can kind of bring to the party. I think the important part is like the context. Is like, well, what does that mean? Like, I think you can string together a bunch of steps and then kind of like, you know, this is how you do this thing. But it's kind of selling that, well, you know, this is highly decoupled, distributed, you know, it's all of the, you know, fault tolerant, exactly like, you know, Dale's talking about, like the fact that it will just, yes, it might fail, but it's got the retry mechanisms, it's got that, all of that plumbing built in, and it can just cope with it for you, and it's fine.
I agree. Like the one thing that I think, at least we never found a great way of solving it that kind of Conductor just takes care of, is you're trying to kind of run from A to Z through all the microservices, and along the way something drops out, or something has a problem, or, you know, you've this synchronous system or parts of async that you're putting together, and now you're going, cool, I'll do a retry. And it's okay, cool. So you do a fixed rate retry of like 10 seconds or whatever, and that's how it's fixed here. And you kind of start implementing paradigms like that across the microservices till you need to differ from that. And now it doesn't work, or you introduce something, and being able to, the simple fact of being able to change and do different recovery strategies of exponential backing off, linear backs off, retry abilities, and that in a common platform, that alone, even if you use no other kind of like concept from Conductor, and just that concept of being able to kind of mediate between services, that alone has helped us massively as a company, and has made us massively fault tolerant. As to, we've had kube clusters blow up on us, and it's like, oh, how do we, you know, it's panic station of getting that back up running. All of our pipelines may get delayed by x number of minutes or x couple of seconds while we kind of like get it all back up and running, but the state's not lost.
Yeah,
you know, you've self-hosted rabbit nodes or anything like that, and the kube cluster blows up, everything's gone. It's all gone. So it's like, how do you catch up? How do you recover from that? You can't ask your end user, hey, can you redo that thing you did a week ago, please? You know, it definitely it doesn't help when you're trying to scale run and do these things at scale. So I think, to your point, Jeff, having these sandbox of just these little demonstrations of like, hey, here's retriability and exponential back off, or this service is going to fail, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen, and kind of demonstrating that to a developer as to problem solution. I think visually being able to see that without having to sit there and read lines upon lines upon lines upon lines of code, that I think it would definitely be helpful in being able to show the kind of the potential of the platform.
Yeah, I think something like that you're touching on there, like, you know, kind of the dev experience element. I think is something that I think is really, really important. Like, you kind of talked about it as well. You touched on that we were doing it. Is it right if I share my screen? Actually, is that might make it
Absolutely.
a little bit easier. But Dale, you mentioned, like, basically, you know, like kind of the distributed nature of it. One of the things that we found really, really, really powerful is, like, you know, I mean, once you're you're running with a significant number of services. You've got databases kind of kicking about all over the place. You can't run these things locally. You can't run your environments locally. Running these services in independence is also then a bit of a pain in the ass, because it's not connected with all the other bits and pieces, your message buses and all of that type of stuff. And I think you touched on it that earlier when we were saying, like, we're running this, split across two different places. We've got stuff running on my laptop. We've got stuff running in Azure. It's all connecting to a single Conductor environment. In fact, actually, in our case, this Conductor environment is actually separate from our Azure environment and obviously the laptop environment in itself. So these kind of all disparate components. But I think from a developer's perspective, when we're running this stuff, it's the fact that you can run this stuff on your machine and then you can debug it. Like, that is such a powerful thing, that we've done it before with messaging services. We've done it before with other technologies, but not with the same degree of elegance and simplicity, that we can just basically say, I'm going to redirect my traffic to run on this thing. And in this case, just going to fire off that workflow, and it's just going to break point, and it's just going to work, and it's going to be there, and it's simple. Yeah.
I agree, and I don't know if Varen touched on this earlier on. The workers or the microservices, instead of kind of this, for the sake of the conversation, instead of the typical, hey, I want to make a GET request or a push request from the calling service, it actually kind of flips that paradigm on its head, where you'll issue a hey, start this workflow for me, please, Conductor, and the actual workers themselves, or the tasks that you've built out, they actually poll for work. So the script kind of gets flipped as to the flow of data, whereas it's not a case of I made a request to this task and the worker died or whatever else. It's, if the worker is dead, it's not going to pull for any new work, so it can just sit there until the worker comes back online, or a replacement or a different kind of deployment set comes back to be able to pick back up where exactly where it left off, essentially. So
Yeah,
I would suggest kind of digging into Conductor a bit more. As a developer, it has some cool features and cool ideas that even you can kind of borrow for your own microservices, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right on.
It's almost like you get the power of like the pub sub type models, but with direct messaging at the same time. It's like this weird child of the both of them, isn't it? It's cool.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we are coming near to the end. I mean, can you guys? I don't know if you guys can believe it. It's been about 2 hours. We're almost at 2 hours, which is kind of wild that it's been that long. Whenever fun conversations like this are happening, time tends to fly. We all know that, but it's really cool doing these sorts of things with both of you, and I'm hoping to do more with the community in general, bringing them in for these conversations, specifically because these are meant to be meetups where we can really get in the weeds. And for other topics people have, feel free to put them in the live chat on YouTube, or you can send them to me in the Slack community, however you want to do it. Before we wrap, though, we have about 8 minutes, and I wanted to do a quick lightning round with both of you. So I've got some questions, short answers only. Got to be short answers only. Some of them will be critical. Some are going to be a little bit less critical, but they're going to be fun nonetheless. First off, Dan, I'm going to start with you because on my screen you're in the upper left. So Dan, what has become the single most valuable component of workflow orchestration for you?
I think it has been our ability to move quickly, and with repeatability and that all that verification, that validation stuff, built into it. It's over other technologies. It's made it significantly quicker and easier.
Dale, same question for you. Single most valuable part of workflow orchestration for you?
Scaling and the reliable scalability of it. The difference in workload between night and day that we see is like huge. So during the day, super busy. It's kind of like the electricity grid, but super busy during the day. At nighttime, dead quiet. silence. You could hear a pin drop. So I think that has the ability for us to be able to scale effectively and know what's going to work. That peace of mind is unmatched.
Awesome. Dan, what is the next thing you're going to try?
We are at the moment considering what next for humans in the loop. We're also thinking about what does AI mean. It's pertinent. It's right there at the forefront of everyone's conversation, I think, in tech. What does that mean for healthcare? What does that mean for drug data? What does that mean for those things that are the underpinnings of making sure the patient's safe? It's complicated, difficult set of questions. So yeah.
Dale, same question for you. What's the next thing you're going to try?
Given our nature of business is essentially bring your own tech, whatever you want to bring, we'll support it. Everyone does everything differently, so trying to do that without stubbing our own toes, let's say. We're going to try to figure that out, how we can expand upon that. We have a pretty good system in place. It's very, very reliable. It's very good at data ingestion, but the people want more, and more means figuring out different ways of doing everything. So
absolutely,
that's kind of where we're going.
And then before I ask thank you for that, by the way. Before I ask the next question, I know this for a fact for Dale. I just want to confirm you're also from the UK originally, right?
I'm originally from Ireland.
Okay, never mind. But the question may still be, you're right, not UK. The question may still be relevant. Chips or chips? Chips or chips?
Chips have like 3 different meanings for me. There's like
That's why I wanted to ask that way. So
there's like potato crisps as we know.
That's
them,
why
like,
I asked the question the way I did.
Yeah.
So it's like chips for UK, Ireland, and chips in the States is not the same thing at all. Not even close. That's why I wanted to ask. I should have had a graphic that actually was like chips with a flag and then chips with another flag, but
yeah. It's just it's going to get contentious. You got to be careful.
That was the point. Just a little bit of heat in the last like 4 minutes before we wrap up. And then like drop that bomb and then just kind of walk out. It'd be more fun if we were in person. Okay, last question, and this is the most critical for me. I don't know about everybody else watching, but always the most critical for me. Dale, I'll start with you. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, Star Wars.
Good man. Dan, Star Wars or Star Trek? It's going to depend on whether we can be friends or not. I'm just throwing that out there. The lightsabers behind me should not influence you a whole lot.
It's hard. It's a hard one. I was brought up on Star Trek, so there's so much there. But yeah,
I will say it's okay. Both answers are good answers. Right. There is no or. It doesn't have to be either. In fandoms, it never has to be either or. I just
it's like you're asking me to defy, to chop myself in half somehow, right? And yeah.
Exactly. They're both great. Both are good storytelling, and any good storytelling is all about connecting with other people, which I think is what workflow orchestration actually is at its core. Is you're building out the story of how something is supposed to operate and what it's supposed to look like. And I think that's an analogy that can always be used. Is we're always trying to tell stories to connect with things, and in the case of applications, I'm just going to say it that workflow orchestration, workflows are like good stories. Just when they're told properly and written well, they succeed. When there's bumps in the road and some character doesn't quite work right, some task doesn't really fit the way it's supposed to, it doesn't execute right, the thing doesn't work properly. There we go. Awesome, guys. I sincerely appreciate having both of you on. Huge thanks to Viren earlier. He did have to run up to San Francisco from the South Bay or from the Bay Area to go to a conference. I sincerely appreciate both of you being here and sticking with us. Quick thank yous to both of you. Love to have you on again. Love to have more community members on again. So yeah, we're going to wrap up, and I'm just going to say that thanks for everyone for being here. I will flash it up on the screen one last time but it'll also be in the description here on YouTube. Right at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the URL to get to the Conductor open source repo. You can go there, you can clone it, you can also fork it and do all kinds of other fun, sappy stuff. We would love you to start it. Please go to the repo and start it. It's a huge help. And if you want to keep up on the other videos and stuff that we do here on YouTube and soon LinkedIn as well, we'll be doing these live streams at least once a month is my hope. So subscribe to the channel. I sound like a YouTuber. Subscribe. Hit that little like button and the notifications so you get all the notifications, the little bell for notifications. It's very silly, but it works. If you can do that, that'd be fantastic. We have another virtual event coming up on Thursday of this week. The registration link is on our page, orkes.io/events. If you go there, you'll see it for 11/21, so Thursday this week at 11 a.m. Pacific time. You can register for that. We'll be streaming that for everyone who is registered, and then it'll be available publicly to everyone afterwards, probably about a week after the live event. So definitely go there and register for the event. All about agents, agentic workflows, building them, and why they're so critical. Dan, Dale, thank you both so much. I sincerely appreciate it. Have a great rest of your days, evenings, and we will talk to everybody else very, very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.